Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560 The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So Gallup, the polling outfit, put out their key measures for this election, which are consistent over time, so you can do a little comparison contrast about correlation. They look at 10, essentially, attitudes of American voters with respect to the two major parties. And in 9 of them, they're advantage Republicans. Things like party identification, 48% Republican to 45% Democrat. That projects out in terms of historic measures to a Republican popular vote win by a couple of points, which would potentially mean an electoral landslide for Trump. Better able to handle the most important problem, which is the economy. The Republicans have a 5-point advantage. The relationship to past presidential election outcomes, both of those questions, party identification and which party is better able to handle the most important problem, strong correlation to victory. And then there's 4 or 5 metrics that have a moderate correlation, like satisfaction with the country's direction, economic confidence, presidential job approval, and then a few metrics that have a weak correlation. But Oliver Wiseman writes in Free Press, considering the latest Gallup data, it's clear Trump and the Republicans should have the upper hand, so why isn't he running away with this? Weissman makes the point Trump has allowed Kamala to rebrand herself after being one of the most, if not the most unpopular sitting vice president in history, certainly modern times. Trump allowed her to rebrand, writes Weissman, offering no consistent critique of the country's eminently critiquable vice president. And he argues that he's wasted time and mind share on the stupid and the bad. I'll give you 2 examples. Weissman writes, first, the stupid. On Saturday, Trump posted a video to Truth Social hawking silver Trump coins. The true symbol of American greatness can be yours for just $100. Last week, he paid a visit to a bar in Greenwich Greenwich Village, where he bought a burger with crypto. None of this screams, I am laser focused on delivering victory in November. That's the stupid, according to Weissman. The bad is hanging out with not-so-racist troll Laura Loomer, preemptively blaming the Jews if he loses in November. I disagree with that. Indulging an unproven sinister fantasy about pet-eating Haitian migrants in Ohio. I sort of disagree with that. Greenlighting J.D.'s Vance on stage with Tucker Carlson last Saturday, just weeks after Carlson interviewed a Nazi apologist who he called, this is Daryl Cooper, who he called the best and most honest popular historian working in the United States today. Yeah, I don't understand Carlson's choice there, but I don't think J.D.
Don't link it to Trump.
Well, I don't think J.D. Vance is like, this is like a double bank shot where I can't appear with Tucker Carlson now because I disagree with some of the guests that he's had. Even if he was overly effusive with respect to Daryl Cooper, which I think he was. Anyway, he goes on to say, does Weissman, just in terms of his assessment of the fundamentals are with Republicans and with Trump, but the race appears to be particularly close. And I've seen other polling that suggests the same. The advice and counsel that Weissman gives is rather conventional. It's not dissimilar to what we've said here, although maybe less specific. And the only thing I would say, like, for example, on the whole pet eating thing with respect to migrants in places like Springfield, that's a way to grab people's attention. Okay, I get it. Get people focused in on it. Then you move off of that, especially when it's obvious the D.C. press corps wants you to stay on that. Why? Because they think it's to your benefit? No, clearly not. you move off of that to stick on the substance and just tell the stories of real American families who have suffered real loss that was eminently preventable, and frame the choice. I mean, at this point, with all of these small communities being overrun and beset with the influx of migrants, and nobody knows why, that you small communities are getting a disproportionate share of migrants, even those that are here legally, like some of the Haitians under temporary protected status. I mean, that is such an easy referendum question. This administration and Kamala's viewpoint on this is so far afield that some laser-like focus on that issue, personifying it, and not with household pets, but with American families, seems to me an obvious and a straightforward thing to do. For more on this, get more analysis from Amber Duke. She is the Spectator's Washington editor. She's also the author of The Snowflakes Revolt, How Woke Millennials Hijacked American Media. Amber, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So, what's your handle on, all the arrows are pointing in Trump's direction on the things that matter to people, and yet he's, beset in a dogfight with Kamala Harris, who is not exactly, does not exactly, conjure up remembrances of Barack Obama's oratorial skills. So I just sort of, it's almost the sort of Saturday Night Live Michael Dukakis line is like, I can't believe I'm losing to this person.
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on. I mean, first of all, is that this is an election made up by two people, and this was the same when it was Biden as the Democratic nominee. Two people that most voters don't want to vote for, meaning not anything to do with their approval ratings or their polls, but just that most people, when asked, say that they wish they had a different option. When it comes down to it, obviously the two options that are there, people will ultimately choose between or opt out of voting. But I think there's a lot of lack of enthusiasm outside of the very motivated Trump base. So that's one issue I think that's maybe plaguing the former president. And then two is that Kamala, because she has used the media as a means of avoiding answering any real questions about her policy positions, particularly how much they've changed over the years, she has managed to create this sort of phantom candidacy where I think voters are kind of projecting what they want her to be onto her. I mean, look at, for example, the progressive base of the Democratic Party, where during the Democratic National Convention, Arab Americans for Harris said that they couldn't possibly support her because she didn't have a Palestinian on stage. And meanwhile, she has said openly that she would continue the Biden administration's policy on Israel. And yet, a few days after the DNC, they said that they were going to support her again because the alternative was just too bad. And they had faith in her that she was going to do the right thing. And then maybe you have some moderate voters who feel like her political transition was sincere and she's really not going to be this radical that she was in the U.S. Senate. So this ambiguity around where she actually stands on issues has been a strategic benefit to her among people who might be considered low information voters or people who are sort of already leaning towards the Democrats and either want someone who's very progressive or on the other side of the coin, want someone who's more moderate. She's been able to sort of shapeshift between those two different coalitions.
But at some point in time, don't you think she's going to have to truly, heartfully, and honestly explain her shift on things like fracking and electric vehicles? And I mean, the list goes on and on.
Well, she should have to, but the problem is we don't have an honest media that's going to hold her accountable and make her do that, which is why I think that first debate was so important and why I actually think it wouldn't be bad strategically for Trump to do a second debate, because the only person who is going to be able to prosecute that case against her is going to be either Donald Trump or members of the independent and conservative press, which she will never, of course, appear in front of. Voters deserve, obviously, those answers. And her refusing to give them, I think, definitely turns a lot of people off. But it also, at the same time, makes her seem like kind of the less scary candidate, because if you don't really pin her down, she's just kind of there. Maybe it's just more of the same.
Yeah, I think there's something else potentially at play too. Get your reaction to this thought. The environment is too target rich, and so they're sort of jumping around. You can't believe it, but it's true. She supports taxpayer funded trans surgeries for prisoners, for inmates. You can't believe it, but it's true. She supports legalization of prostitution. You can't believe it, but it's true. She wanted to have a conversation about abolishing ICE. She raised money for a fund that provided bail to people that burned down Minneapolis. You can't believe it, but it's true. But you have to focus, right? Because they're just hopping around, and there's no staying power with any particular issue that you're calling the question. This is the question in this election, and it's up or down. And if you're up, then it's Trump, and if you're down, then it's Kamala. Like open borders, and just relentlessly, methodically telling stories, as I said at the outset, of government policy inflicted tragedies on American families. All we're going to do is spend the next week or spend an hour and a half on a debate stage, as you just mentioned, telling story after story and just holding her to account for being part of the administration that has inflicted this devastation on American families. That's all I want to talk about. And you can try to pull me in this direction or that direction, J6, whatever, and I'm going to do it's interesting. That's a great question. Anyway, back to what I want to talk about, and just demand that Americans focused in on this and call the question that they have to answer. It just seems to me there needs to be, to Oliver Weissman's point, more discipline. You got to penetrate the big things that matter. So people's quality of life because of the economic climate, people's quality of life because of the public safety climate.
Exactly. And that's kind of going back to my point, which is that voters are a little bit confused because there hasn't been a clarity of messaging from either side. On the Kamala side, it's very much speaking in platitudes, being very vague about what it is she actually stands for, not explaining why her policies have changed, except that her values supposedly still remain the same. And then on the Trump side, there hasn't been a singular message to really define who Kamala is. And I think the big struggle is trying to combine the fact that she has changed on so many policy issues with the idea that she is doing this to hide what she would actually do when in office, right? You have to make the case that if she were elected president, she would implement those 2019 policies. That's why she's not explaining it, because she wants plausible deniability for when she reverts back to that radical senator that she was to the left of Bernie Sanders. Those two things haven't been adequately connected, I think, in some of the campaign messaging.
Well, she's a fraud. I mean, and Jane Fonda's supporting her and out there campaigning with her. And Jane Fonda told CBS News that, I'm going with Harris and Walz because in 4 years, fossil fuels emission will be cut down by 55%. And no one,
whatever. Right. Okay.
I just think she's a fraud. She'll say anything to get elected. That's the position I feel that she's putting us in right now.
Yeah, but the flip flopper thing, Amber. I mean, it's the problem is that a lot of a great percentage of the American electorate, they flip flop too. They vote for Obama. They vote for Trump. They sort of feel their way around. They like some issues here. They like some issues there. They like a person, or things are going okay, so they'll stick with it, or they're not going okay, so it's time to make a change. So, I mean, the idea of a politician flip-flopping when they're sort of conditioned to be lied to, I mean, that's not enough.
Right, and that's my concern about that particular messaging without making the case that she really is the radical. You have to pick one, right? She's either the radical or she's the moderate. And I mean, for the purposes of political strategy, of course you want her to be the radical, but that is what I truly believe, that she is the radical. And because otherwise people will say, okay, great, she listened to the American public on these issues, and now she's actually adopting things that we like, such as saying that she's a gun owner, or saying that she wants to get rid of taxes on tips, and that she wants to increase the child tax credit. Like, people, if they hear that side of it, well, she flip-flopped to a more popular position and one that I support. That's not a winning political message for Trump.
Yeah, exactly. I just, I mean, do you have a sense from the campaign if this is a Trump freelancing, as is his wont, or if it's and the campaign is just whether they are advising him to do whether they're comfortable with this or not. The position is we're just going to let Trump be Trump and see what happens based on these fundamentals that are in our favor. We should be okay. I mean, is that it?
I'm not sure who is advising Trump and if he's taking their advice or not, or if he's just freewheeling. But I will say that back when the candidate swap happened, I interviewed RNC Chairman Michael Whatley at that time, shortly before the debate, actually. Or maybe it was right after. But basically, there were rumors that Biden might not be the candidate. And he said to me that it doesn't matter who the candidate is, we're going to run our race. And I think that is right to a point, especially when you have the issues on your side. But you also need to take care to define your opponent. You have to explain why they're the worst option, why they're not going to be good for the American people. And I'm not convinced that the Trump campaign and the RNC were prepared with a singular focused message on Kamala for exactly the reasons you mentioned, which is there's so much compromise against her, and she was such a weak candidate that maybe they kind of took for granted that she would be an easy person to sideswipe. But because of the fact that she wasn't Joe Biden, who was basically decrepit, it did lead to some motivation and energy among the left and made some of the moderates who said Biden was too old maybe start to reconsider the fact that they were sort of reflexively for Trump as the alternative.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the other sort of wild card. It's hard to measure the senescence wild card, which is, I'm tired of two 80-year-old dudes running and rerunning and people of that generation. And let's just turn the page and get somebody that's one generation down. And it just feels like it's going to be something different because, I'm sort of, as you said, I'm projecting something different on her because she's from a different generation, younger, more vibrant,
right.
New on the scene, even though she's not. She appears to be for some people. Yeah, I mean, I think that is a wild card that is working to her advantage at present. Amber Duke, Spectator's Washington editor, author of The Snowflakes Revolt: How Woke Millennials Hijacked American Media. Amber, thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. It's a bank where relationships still matter.